I'm not sure, but just wing it. Let's just wing it.
Hey, hello.
Hey.
So today we have a little bit of something special. I'm joined by my very dear friend Keilah, and we have basically got together through a group that we met, but mostly from the calling of wanting to collaborate with the sort of healing, psychology type areas, and especially with children, but with ourselves first. Get it right on ourselves first. And we just both got the ping that it would be fantastic to do this call. So really, this call's just a hey, how you doing? You know, and see where the conversation goes, really. So yeah, that's it. So Keilah, why don't you just like introduce yourself a little bit? Just say a little bit about what you do and how you got started and just that sort of stuff.
So hey, Nikki, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here, so unexpected. I am actually, right, so I am a single mommy of three. A couple of years ago, I started to get a little bit of life coaching practice in and between rehab centers, recovery centers. It is a topic that I hold very close to my heart. I have some experience in addiction and recovery. And it's been a number of years since then. I've gone through a few health issues, which have helped me realize how on the mind-body connection. And then very recently, which is something I thought that maybe we could chat about today, or I could just share with you, is a conference, a course that I went on this weekend, a personal development course. And what was mind blowing, I mean, I do know where to start because I do know what it is that I want to tell you, but I wouldn't really know where to start because there was so much that was covered and it was so exciting. But for me, what I took out was a process that they discuss. They call it the cost process, where they look at resentment really that you've been holding against, any particular event in your life or a person, and for a lot of people that's family or ex-husbands and sometimes even children, and the list just goes on. And what I found so fascinating is that I wasn't as conscious as I thought I was on this process with myself or for myself, because I seem to have it born in me. I forgive, but deeply, not just, oh, I forgive you, we move on, and let's give it another bash or whatever the case is. But I, from a very young age, being very good at just looking at the person, at that human, looking at their hearts, and listening to their soul and forgiving them on a very deep level. But there was an integral part missing, which I learned about this weekend, and that was the resentment. So
and what you do with that resentment, is that what you mean, and how to process it?
Yes. If you could just give me, sorry about this, just give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, it's really about dealing with that resentment, like really digging deep and looking at the resentment and unpacking it and breaking it down, and looking at what elements of the resentment, as if you could even unpack that one particular point even further. But looking at it, writing it down and looking at it, going into a visualization, literally sitting in front of that person in your visualization and speaking to them and telling them about this, resentment that you've been holding. And it's a whole process. They taught us about what it cost. I looked at what it's cost me for one particular person. Obviously, there's a list. We have a list of people that I didn't even realize I was holding resentment towards. And this one particular person, I thought that I had dealt with the forgiveness aspect, but I realized that I've actually been holding resentment in so many ways for about 20 years, which is, just about half of my life. That is a long time. And when that is in front of you, and you see what you are doing to yourself, they haven't done anything to you. Obviously, that comes through a different process. It is an absolute. It was liberating. I feel like a brand new person. Still processing a lot. I'm actually feeling quite drained today. Still, we're on Wednesday now. But it's beautiful, and I just feel like the whole world needs to know.
It's amazing, because actually when you say resentment and forgiveness, they're absolutely polar opposites. And it reminds me of this whole balance thing in life. In my work now, I'm always thinking, where's the balance here? Because, a good amount of, let's say, okay, I was taught a while ago that in relationships, if anything irritates you, don't sit on it, don't dig it, push it down, don't kind of be like, oh, I'll ignore it. Vocalize it, but with love. Say it nicely, find the best way of getting it out. Otherwise, resentment plus resentment plus resentment is like a snowball action, and it builds and builds, and eventually you come out and you're like, and that person's like, what's wrong with you? Where did that come from? And it just, it reminds me of that seesaw. You've got resentment at one end and forgiveness at the other. Where's the happy medium is not letting that resentment grow, so the forgiveness isn't needed. Yeah, amazing. Carry on. Well, please tell us all about
it. I'm actually just listening and processing what you said. I'm still an absolute sponge. So my head goes on another whole train there when you're saying, find the balance, and then forgiveness won't even be needed.
Yeah, I mean, because I've realized that ego behaviors are out of balance, but it could be either way. So let's say something is irritating you and making you angry, and that's an insignificance issue. The other side of that will be taking action, being significant, being the cause basically, and taking action. Therefore, if you come up, if something pops into your field and you're like, oh, not sure about that, then nip it in the bud, like do less sooner, and say, okay, where could that go if it was to blow up? What's the preventative measure I could take now so that, that's kept under wraps, or you know what I mean, from growing and becoming too big a deal. Yeah. So this whole standing on the seesaw in the middle and just getting your footing just right so that it's a complete balanced, thing.
Exactly. And this is why I also, so I mean, here we are at whatever age we are now, it's irrelevant. But the point is, we've had all these human years behind us of that sort of programming. And now, obviously, we're open and we're having these opportunities to reprogram ourselves. But what's so beautiful is last night was the final evening. I took my daughter with, but there was a younger girl there as well. And the course is open to teenagers. And then, I mean, there was a lady who was even in her 80s that was there. It was so special. But is that the children are learning. These tools are being taken into the schools, and this is exactly where it needed to be to begin with. But it doesn't matter. The point is, they are learning now. Yeah. And what is so eye-opening is that it actually makes sense. For me anyway, I can't speak for everybody, but I do know for a lot of people, it doesn't always sink in straight away. For me personally, I need to have an experience first, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what it was trying to teach me. Yeah. That was my contract, clearly, to learn literally by experience. But the kids, it's like it was born in them. They know this. They know this already. It makes sense. It activates something, like it's electrifying. And the fact that adults are standing on the other side and speaking a language that kids understand, like that for me it made me quite emotional.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I've worked with the younger kids, more like teenagers and young adults, and bless them. They're going through situations that, I mean, it's heartbreaking that they go through any situation that's been induced by their parents or family members or close people. It's heartbreaking, but they're doing it, and that you know, in a way they're so sensitive, but in a way they're so strong, they're so tough, they adapt, so it becomes their norm. And that's not to say that it's not something that they would induce if they had a choice. It's just that they do have this most incredible coping strategy. But how amazing and beautiful is it when we can give them these tools that allows them to stop the dysfunction right there and then, and not to carry it on into adult life, and not to carry it on into their own children's experiences. It's just, it gives me tingles every time I think about it, and every time we want to put that into action. But we have to learn it ourselves, because we know that it works if it works on our dysfunctional behavior and our experiences. We can go, yeah, this stuff actually works, and then we can just tell the kids, and it's like, oh, great, happy days. And they can be these, you know, I think one of the saddest things to see are the teenagers that are already shutting down. They're unconfident, or they're disconnected, or they feel like no one is in their corner, and they're already fighting for survival. I love it when you can see these children, and because you know what, they still are in a way. We're still children in the way of the world. You know, you never stop learning, you never stop growing. No. And they're confident, they're exploratory, they're, you know, taking life in and exploring what makes them happy. It's beautiful.
Exactly, and just also so wise. I was having a chat with a young girl just a couple of days back now, just earlier last week, but and she was just speaking about, and look, her circumstances at home are not easy. She's very spiritually wise and connected, and that doesn't come from home, but that comes from inside. And although she's acting out and there is dysfunction, she's aware of it, and she's aware that it's a coping skill while she's in that space. But she knows when she's out how, or at least she has her plan of how it's going to be, because, you know, in her mind's eye, this is the way. But she's conscious of the fact that this is a coping skill. I mean, for me, I had lots of dysfunction growing up in my own behavior. You know, due to whatever the case was, but I didn't realize it was dysfunctional. And lots of families are like that. I didn't realize that things are dysfunctional until now that we started, you know, or the last however many years that we started working through it. Then you're like, oh, but is it? You know, then you spend a couple of years questioning whether it was really dysfunctional, because you could step into this protection mode. You know, you can't bear the thought of blaming anybody, because that would sound like you're blaming somebody. Then you go through the whole process of, no, it's not blame. Everybody was doing the best that they could with what they had and the knowledge that they had and how they were brought up and whatever the case is. And that takes a couple of years to unpack. But the kids nowadays, they just got it, man. They just got it, and they're just so ready. You know, it's like they're born healed. It's just, it's so.
Wow. I find that they're definitely old, you know, even with my little ones, I kind of knew, I had just this feeling that they would be old souls. I had this, especially my youngest, I connected with his soul before he was even conceived. I mean, I knew he was coming. I was told he was coming. And I almost had a bit of a bit of fun, and he came through, and he even spelled out his name. It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a whole story in that. But anyway, he started spelling out his name, but we'd settled on a different name at that stage. And when it wasn't going right, I scrabbed it, because sometimes when we do this method of communication, there's a whole load of gobbledygook coming through. So, you know, it's a bit hit and miss. And so I put it down to gobbledygook, and we only chose his name from a suggestion after he was born. We just couldn't decide on anything. And my niece, or my niece by marriage, actually suggested something. And then I was like, holy moly, that's the name that was being spelled out to me. And I scrapped it. It was incredible. But yeah, they are old souls, and I listen, you know, when they say their little words. Yeah, just, it's good to listen and not assume that we know it all, because we don't, and not assume that we're in the right because we're the adult, because we're not. Things like that. It's
I mean, that's a time when silence is loud, and it's a good thing. You know, when you just keep quiet, we are seen seen and not heard. You know, as a parent, I often feel like that. I'm seen and not heard. So
Yeah.
I kind of try to dive into that and be like, right, now I'm going to see and not hear. I'm going to see you and listen,
Yeah.
which is different. And there's a different feel to it as well. And it's just so, you know, it's like they are rebirthing us. It's like we gave birth
Yeah.
to that human, but they are rebirthing us. That's
Yeah.
how I
Right.
feel about,
Through the
you know,
experience.
this generation. It's just, it's so beautiful.
And what's amazing is, there was a time not that long ago where it was like little kid. I was told this when I was growing up. Like kids should be seen and not heard.
Exactly.
That's the thing. You keep quiet, you stay out the adults' way, whatever. And now we're flipping it around. So that just goes to show the progress we've made in a couple of generations, or one generation. That
Yeah.
now, what you were just saying, let them play, let them experiment, let them experience life without being shut down from an early age, and
Yes, and I,
see where these blossoms, see how they blossom, I should say. Wow. What else did you get from this
exactly.
weekend? What other things did you find
Oh,
enlightening?
well, there were lots of different processes. I mean, it was the course itself was a total of 29 hours.
Wow.
That was really intense training. That was Friday to Sunday. And then we just had the last bit last night, which was really empowering as well, because that was sort of what do they call it? They call it a results process. It's
Wow.
manifestation. And, you know, you have your accountability partner and you put your, you know, it's the same sort of stuff we've done. But it's always different when it's in a different environment. You know, someone could use one word that changes that sentence and you hear it differently and suddenly something's activated. So whilst this goal or vision of mine has been there for I don't know how many years, it's just been there for I don't know how many years. And I've done meditations on it, but it never really, uh, maybe I just wasn't ready for it until last night, as serious as it was.
Yeah.
And I really, really integrated it. But what I did want to say to you is it may not have been a part of this weekend, but as you know, I had chatted with you very briefly about another colleague of mine who had been doing soul retrieval with me.
Mm.
And she fell very ill. I was going back so that she could teach me, so that I could actually come online and share this stuff with you. And she fell very ill. And so, you know, naturally, usually I would have thought that my sessions would have stopped too until she was better. So I asked her if she could please explain, if would she mind sharing the process with me, and she did. And for 3 consecutive weeks, I kept doing the soul retrieval process on myself. Um, the reason I'm bringing this up is related to the resentment process. So I couldn't understand why it wasn't really a confidence thing. I just seemed to have had this block. You know, I was trying to communicate and kind of get the downloads on how I would present this. Uh, Going live wasn't, it didn't feel like it was the right way to do it. So I thought, okay, well, if I am to record, how does that even look? You know, and I found myself, it felt like I was wasting time looking all of this stuff up. But I realized why I wasn't ready is because I needed this very integral piece of information that the resentment needed to be taken care of. You
Yeah.
know, so even though the soul retrieval, which let me just touch on very briefly
Please
for anybody
do.
who may be watching, is that,
Go for it.
yeah, Maya,
Please.
in and every encounter we have with a person, place, or well, I say place, or any living being, your pets, absolutely anything. Something as small as I'm sitting in this chair right now and the door slams and I get a fright. There are pieces of my shattered soul right here in this seat because I got a fright. It might not have been trauma in the way everybody else sees it as trauma, but it was traumatic in the moment, right? So that's quite, it's sort of overboard, that explanation, but just to give you an idea of how, help me with that word. it is, how that word it is, right? So anything as small as the door slamming. So now we look at people who have sort of, other traumas, whether it's abuse or divorce or surgeries, you name it, car accidents, it could be anything. But even just relationships, especially intimate relationships, because we exchange pieces of our soul with that person when we connect with them, even if it's just energetically, and then obviously on a physical level if it does get intimate. So the first practice that I did in her presence was really about collecting the pieces of my shattered soul from, and we just did a few people on the first night, and the rest I did on my own. And some of them I can feel I need to redo, but when you actually do it, which is, I may just speak to you aside from this, and we'll figure out how to put it together, but it needs to get out there, is just to be, you obviously go into your meditation, you have to call on your angels. There's a very specific procedure on who you're speaking to, because when you're dealing with spirit, it's not that you want to be careful or protect yourself, because otherwise you're giving that focus, but you want to be specific which angels you're speaking to, and how they will be help in collecting the shattered pieces of your soul from any person, place, or thing.
Wow.
When you do collect it back, angels do their work. You are specific in your instruction on what they are to do with it. And then they put the pieces back where they rightfully belong. So firstly, they put the pieces back with you. And after that process, you do the process of retrieving that person's pieces of their soul from you, healing them, and then sending them back to their rightful owner. And it sounds quite intense, and it is really intense, especially when you feel it. You can feel it, and it's hard. Sometimes you don't want to, if it is an ex, maybe somebody that you haven't quite, you thought you let go, but until you've done this process, you realize that you are hanging on, and it could very well be resentment that's keeping you hanging on, not the fact that you have attachments. Yes, the attachments may be because of the resentment, and then that's where we just go digging deeper into what type of attachment is it? What type of resentment is it that's holding you there? And then it doesn't become about the person anymore. You realize that it's you. It's not what they did to you. It's yours. And where you were at that stage of your life when that took place, that version of you, always related to a younger version of you that was hurt in the same way, or you felt the same way. And it's just a collective process of healing the little versions of you, and it's just so beautiful, and it's so necessary. So again, I just feel like, I've told my kids about it when they're ready, and maybe we could do one together, and maybe they'll feel it and maybe they won't, but anyway, I just feel like a lot of people do need to know.
What that was really making me think of when you started talking about that is, for me, when I've learned my sort of work, I was taught about 5 negative emotions that are the parent of all emotions, negative emotions. And they were anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt. But as I carried on, I was like, there's another one. And I added shock to the list, which I really feel is what you've been talking about, because the shock, I feel, is the one that is the hardest to process. The one that stays around the longest, that can dissipate and go deep down and stay there. And it can be shock about anything, why something happened, how someone could do something, physical shock like surgery. The unconscious mind is, even though we're anesthetized, the unconscious mind isn't. It knows what's going on. It's being cut open. It's being, feel all this. So shock for me is a really, really big one. And when we can process it, this is why we have the never-ending thought loops, or the alternative is when it's really bad, your subconscious goes, we're going to archive this one. We're going to put it in the deep, dark depths, because we're not in a place to deal with this right now. It's far too energy consuming. Now is not the time. And when it comes up for you later in life, sometimes decades later, and you're like, where did this come from? But your soul, whatever part of you it is saying, now you've got the tools, now you're in the right place, now you need to let this go, now we can process this and find resolution. Because it's like, it's a nice analogy. So imagine you are a filing clerk in an office, and people keep coming in and putting on, you know, paperwork and files on your desk, and you have to file them. You have a system, and then let's say you got these files that come on your desk, and you're like, I don't know where to file this one, and all of a sudden they like mount up and up and up, and then you look at your desk, you're overwhelmed, and you start stressing because you're like, I don't know where to put this. I can't do my job.
Right.
And then imagine how good it is when you can. You're given further tools to be able to file those experiences in the relevant places. And your desk is clean. And just that, you know, that energetic of, it's done, you did it, you achieved it, you're in control, you can cope with it all, you can find resolution. All of that energy can come through when you, and the other thing that it led me to when I was listening to you was, I was imagining these two strands of DNA, and as our strands are double helixes and they come together, so do we and another person, and our energy fields, you know, interact, like you say. And you know, one thing I picked up recently on a TikTok video, which I was, you know, it's the little things that are like little truth bombs that you've not heard of before and you're blown away. And he said, the guy said, you know, and I knew this, it's just the way he said it. He goes, what you say matters. It forms matter. So imagine, yeah, right? It forms matter. What you say matters. And I was like, oh, that's so good. So if you're in a conflict with somebody in any way and they say something that is shocking to you, it forms matter and it matters to you. You take it in and you can't process it sometimes. So having these tools, these techniques to untwist, you know, and we've all had to like sit there and untwist a necklace that's got knotted, or my daughter got slime in her hair, like the new craze of slime. She got it in her hair. But you know, that whole untangling this mess, and this is what we're trying to do emotionally. And when we've got the tools to do it, it becomes so much easier, and the satisfaction and the relief and the release of not having that weight and that density drag you down anymore is just beautiful. And it's very much like, you know, the process sounds very similar to what we've been exploring recently, which is that go to the unwanted part, find out what it needs to say, what does it want, what is hurting about it, you know, what matters here, and then being able to give it the love.
See, now that you're saying it, sorry to cut in, I'm just,
no, please.
Now that you're saying, now it makes sense to me, because you and I have been speaking for some time, and when I'm having my meltdowns, and you would say to me, you know, speak to the unwanted part, that whole thing that you just said, and I was like, I want to understand what you're saying, but I don't know what you're saying to me. I just felt like a kid because I was so frustrated. It didn't hit me. And then, but then, just like you've just mentioned now about, you know, seeing that guy saying, you know, what you say matters.
Yeah.
But we've heard that for so long, and then suddenly it just pinged. Like, that's what happened this weekend. Is that it just pinged. It just pinged. Everything you've been saying to me, it just fell into place. It just made sense.
Amazing. Sometimes we do need to be guided through stuff, you know. It's like when you're doing something for the first time, when you're a student for the first time, you have, you know, what I call growing pains. It's confusion, it's new, there's no familiarity, there's nothing you can use to say, oh, I know what to do with this, I know what to do with that. You're literally, your brain's open, your mind's a sponge. It's so tiring. You're exhausted after a day of doing this learning. And then slowly you're like, where do I start with this? And you just, okay, listen again, listen again, listen again. next time you listen, you're starting to know what they're going to say, and then you piece it together. You know what that is? Oh my God, this is the reverse of the fast phobia model. Have you ever heard of this NLP model that is how you undo post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD?
Heard of it in my studies, yes. Haven't focused on it, so please go there.
So basically, and I apologize that I might get the details slightly wrong, but if you have had a traumatic experience or like a phobia or any traumatic experience, right? Then what you do, you're meant to watch you in the movie of the phobia. And if that's too painful, then you watch yourself sitting in the cinema watching the movie that you're in on the screen. So they call it a double dissociation. Or even if it's a triple dissociation, you could then hear the story of a friend saying how she saw somebody in the cinema watching a film that was of this movie. Do you see what I mean? These degrees of separation, so the phobia doesn't feel too close. And then, you watch the phobia from before it starts to after it's ended, and you watch it forward, I think, in black and white at normal speed, like a film. And then you press rewind, you see it go backwards in color. The color and the black and white, I can't remember which way round, the forward or the backward is black and white or is in color, but it doesn't matter. But then when you reverse this movie, you speed it up. So you might reverse it and 10 times the normal playing speed. And then you do it again, forwards, backwards, forwards, back. And then you find you get these black patches in the movie of the phobia where you can't see it happening anymore. And you keep going, and it only takes about 20 minutes. And before you know it, you cannot run that phobia anymore. You've literally erased it from your brain. I was just like, this is so good. And then you test it. And I was testing it on kids who had a fear of spaces. So we'd go into the lift in the library next to where we were working, and they'd go up and travel in the lift. And they'd never used the lift before. They'd always used the stairs. Or they had a fear of spiders. So we'd go to the public toilets because there's usually a big hairy spider sitting in the, public toilet ceiling somewhere, or wherever you could find anything like that. And you test the phobia straight away to see if it still existed or not. And I did actually the best phobia. Sorry that we're kind of detracting a little bit, but it's a good story. So my godmother had a 25-year phobia of flying. And she used to love flying. She used to go traveling, and then she developed this phobia. And when we were talking about it, I said to her, right, I'm going to ask you some really silly questions. Right, what's the problem with flying? And she said, well, I'm afraid the plane might crash. And I was like, and what's the problem if the plane crashes? She said, well, I might die. And I was like, okay, and what's the problem if you die? And she's like, well, my life will be over. And I said, or will it? So I said, I have evidence to believe that when you die, you go to your version of heaven. You don't even just go to this generic heaven, you go to your version of heaven. And we both had evidence of this because some years before, we'd done an angel board in the middle of the day, sunniest room we could find because we were all really scared. And we did an angel board. We'd never done anything like this before. And my godmother's best friend had come through who died of breast cancer 10 years before. Now, she was renowned for loving hot holidays and loving hot saunas. She loved heat, right?
Wow.
So she came through, and after the kind of, how are you? Are you okay? All that sort of business. She said, my godmother said to her, what's it like there? And her friend went, hot. So we had a treble confirmed, or actually a quadruple confirmed that afternoon. Yeah, right. So I said to her, if you knew that the gateway to an eternity in heaven was 5 minutes of hell, would you walk through it? She was like, yeah. I said, you would, wouldn't you? You would. If you knew what was on the other side, you'd go through it knowing what was on the other side, knowing that this is only going to last for 5 minutes. you could brace yourself.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I could. And then I said,
Oh.
what do you think, what happened before the phobia? When did the phobia start? And she said, I remember my mum saying to me one day, nothing comes for free that you love, nothing you want. There's always a price you pay for everything. And she had, and this is what the brain does, it takes information and it distorts it, generalizes it, and makes it fit to your values or beliefs, or your accepted values or beliefs, or limiting beliefs. And bum, there she
Exactly.
did a first class job of producing a phobia about something she loved, which was flying or traveling. And so I said to her, I'm sure your mum meant very well, but do you think that those, I said, love is free. Dancing is free. You don't even need to have music to dance. You can sing, you can make your own music up, you know? All these things that can give you joy. Cuddles, hugs, hug a tree. You don't even need a person. You can hug a tree. Laying on the ground. There's so many things that you can do that will give you joy, that are free. I said, so do you think you could leave that belief behind? If it doesn't serve you anymore, why take it forward, right? I said, what if we could imagine ourselves on a plane, and as that plane took off down that runway, because it is quite fast, it's kind of one of the scariest parts of flying. I said, but imagine you're leaving that old belief. You're leaving it behind on the runway. You're leaving behind all of the trauma of not being able to fly, of not being free. You're leaving the shackles behind as you take off and fly, literally. And she did. She booked a flight 2 weeks later to test her phobia to Venice.
Yeah.
Because she then wanted to book a flight to see her daughter in New York, who'd lived out there for some years, and she'd never been to visit her because she was too scared of flying. And
good word.
she sent signs and pictures of her being on the plane and, ticket and airport and all the rest of it, and being in Venice. And yeah, bang, phobia gone.
Amazing. Well done. Wow, good work.
It was intuitive, but it just goes to show. Huh?
It's just so simple.
It kind of was. It was like, go to the time before the issue started and what happened then. And people go straight to it. They go straight to the cause of the dysfunction.
Sorry. Just knocked the table there. Having a whole party going on here. That's where it all starts, right? Is right down at the root. Which I find is a big block for a lot of people. Most people don't want to, and that's why a lot of people don't want to start healing, because they know that it goes right down to the root, right down to the cause. And what people are doing nowadays and have been for a long time is just treating the symptom and not the cause, or ignoring the symptom and the cause, whatever the case is. But I love what you just shared with me, and I love that it was a success even more so. Somebody was willing and obviously trusted you, so well done on that. It trusted you to be able to take that, and it reminds me a lot of my youngest. Just the one little thing that came to mind is, we live on a street where a lot of homeless people are, and but they've been here and homeless for many years. And his idea at first was that, shame, mommy, look at all these poor people. And we just spoke about, what does poor mean to you? And sure, there were, his measure was, for me, about whether I am poor or not, me as in mommy, is if he'd asked me a couple of days in a row if he could have whatever that is, whether it's a toy or an ice cream or whatever that is, or to go somewhere that costs, and I wasn't perhaps in a space where I could say, yes, let's go. Even if I could, it wouldn't be every day. But the point is, he got a series of no's, and so drew the conclusion in his mind that, oh, mommy's poor. And that's actually where the conversation was triggered. So I then said to him, but you know that these guys on the street, some of them choose to live there. Not all of them are sad. Some of them are very sad, and some of them have very sad stories, and some have been there over 20 years. Wow. Their children couldn't live with them on the streets. They've gone into a system. They're growing up in whichever system it is. because they didn't want to take their children with them on the streets. But some of them actually earn decent money there. And some of them are so understood by other people on the streets that that's become their new family. So we cannot even categorize anyone or anything by those two titles, rich and poor. I am so rich. So this is what we started speaking about. Boy, I am so rich because I get to drive in my car home and park behind the, oh, we've got gates. Okay, we park, we've got security. We get to walk upstairs into our own home. And then in that home, let me look at all the things that make us rich. Sure, we don't have, here's the list of things we don't have, but really, we do have, and we are so rich in that. We are so rich in whatever it is, food, water, we've got electricity, we've got, just down to the basics. Before that child is whatever age, and then it's stuck in them, and I'm sure a lot of it comes from mainstream schools as well, rich, poor, when they're learning about opposites and whatever. I mean, I'm sure rich and poor is in there, designed that way. Let me not get started on the system. But that was just something that came up for me while you were speaking about that. Is and you said it was who that didn't want to get on a plane?
My godmother.
And she's how old?
Oh, she was probably 60 when we did this, late 50s, 60, something like that.
You see, and I mean, your whole life, can you imagine?
It's a 25-year phobia. Yeah.
60 odd years before you go and explore, because there was this little fear that was created way back then.
Yeah.
And if I look at myself and these little niggly bits that I'm also diving into so that I can start to attract more of the abundance that I see in my vision as that is true abundance, not what I was taught possibly when I was his age, by whomever, that this is what rich is and this is what poor is, and imagine where he may be, he may not be, but where he may very well be by the time he's 40, because there was no rich or poor. Well, there was no color. It just is. There's no good and bad. It's the way it happened.
Sorry. How about you play the game with him, like saying, rich or poor comes from within. So I had a bit of a strange situation when I was growing up. So I loved horses, and my dad worked in a cottage that was at the end of a row of cottages that was attached to this big stables and farm that was owned by these very rich people. And it was £18 a week to keep your horse there when I was 13, which wasn't that bad. It was pretty reasonable, really. It was a lot cheaper than I thought. But then you've got your hay and your feed and bits and pieces. So it could build up. But actually, you didn't need to be rich to have a horse. And it has been my passion since they stuck me on a donkey in a fairground on a holiday. And that was it. I was addicted. And I had dedicated myself, and I'd proved that this was not a hobby that was going to go when I, fell over and cut myself or something like that. I was there for the long haul. And so I think I was growing up quite quick. And my dad was thinking, we live on a big estate. She's going to be 16, fully grown, bored, and there'll be boys. I don't think I want to, I think I want to intervene here. So he bought me a horse. And the other girls who had horses, generally, pretty much all of them came from wealthy backgrounds. So their house was the same size as my block of flats. So we lived in a block of, let's say, 6 flats. Their house was easily as big as my block of flats. And one day I remember saying to my dad in the car, I wish we were rich. I must have been like 13, 14. Because I'd go to these people's houses and they just had everything. It was, and
so normal for a teenager too,
Yeah. And he said, we're rich in love. Yes. And I understood it, but at the time I wasn't. I was like, still like the money.
Rolling eyes and you don't understand.
But I didn't challenge him. I felt what he may have been feeling. But anyway. Right. And now knowing that you can, knowing there are celebrities and singers and people who have got as much money as you could ever want, and inside they are not
They
a
did.
lot.
They did.
You can
Yeah.
have the freedom of being a nomad, the freedom of not having to conform to any system or do as you're told, or stress to find money to then pay somebody else to keep this roof over. You know, it's always different. There are always pluses and minuses in every situation, isn't there? But imagine we can teach the kids at that age, you know, your richness can come from inside. Did you know if you can imagine and ask and visualize, it can happen? You know, your
Yeah.
words and your thoughts matter. They become matter.
Exactly.
And imagine, because the kids don't have the logic at that age to go, oh yeah, but they don't have the buts. They're just like, oh wow, yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, because the only reason we but is because firstly we doubt, and the doubt comes from a previous experience of programming. So if that isn't there,
Yeah.
happy days. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Do it, see how he gets on and see what he didn't think. I mean, even if you started him manifesting now simple things, simple little things like having a particularly good day at school, or developing a particularly good friend, or a day out trip somewhere somehow, and it doesn't even have to cost money. You know, there's some of the most fun adventurous things are going in nature, and you know, you live in an incredible place, beautiful countryside. See what he can do with his manifesting skills.
They quick. They pick up on it quickly. My daughter and I, she's a teenager, but I mean, we always calling out, oh, do you see what you just manifested? You know, some days it's like, I didn't ask for it like that.
Yeah.
Listen to me, you got to be more specific. But every little thing happening around us all the time, all the time.
And the daydreams. I find the daydreams are astonishingly powerful. And actually today I watched a video and it said about when we get too stressed, we have like almost a shut off and we start to daydream. I don't know how some people I don't think have that shut off. I think it's a bit stuck. But for sure, I mean, just that the relief and the satisfaction that daydream brings, because as we were told, you know, give the brain in fantasy what you can't give it in reality. It doesn't know the difference.
Exactly. And it's sad because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about um, I have a son who was labeled a daydreamer in the system. They didn't enjoy that. And I mean, he was my first experience of the system and twisted principles, and medicated because the daydreaming would have gotten him nowhere. So it makes me sad because people aren't safe to embrace that side. It doesn't mean that if somebody daydreams that they're going to be sitting all day in a daydream, but if they're allowed to just have that moment and have a little dream, it really doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
And go there and come back and then be wide awake and maybe be able to focus a little bit better. But when you're constantly not allowed to drift off, and it be labeled as an attention disorder, or you know, there's a whole list of things. Let's just pop a tablet on that, and so that everybody can fit in. It's quite sad, but anyway, at least we got the tools, and at least we know the way up.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's exciting now. Maybe we'll wrap up now because it's been a brilliant conversation. We'll keep it short, shortish, so people can follow. But you know, having these tools, so we're committed to bringing these tools to people in all sorts of ways, and to the children and to ourselves, and by streamlining them and you know, helping develop them even more. They can all just become easier and easier to follow and not implicate, integrate, and there's another word, sounds like that, into our lives. So amazing. So it's been so lovely speaking to you today. Please come back again. Let's talk
Thank
more.
You so much.
Oh, it's
been honored.
Love you so much. Speak soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.